All right, the next item is item number 12, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, docket number 15-6847, block 515, lot 31, 145 Wooster Street in the Soho Cast Iron Historic District, a Renaissance Revival-style office building designed by Louis Korn and built in 1896-97. And the application is to remove metal shutters and install storefront infill and signage.
Good morning, Teresa Landmark staff. 145 Wooster Street is located on the west side of the street between Houston Street to the north and Prince Street to the south. The application is for work at the existing storefront infill, which includes the removal of all metal shutters shown here in the closed position and the installation of a full-height display window, which is where there is presently fixed metal shutters. And the commission issued a certificate of appropriateness in 1987 for the current storefront infill design with the full height display windows and metal shutters. The architect is here to present the application.
Good
Thank you,
afternoon.
Kara.
My name is Natal Fredette, and our application for 145 Wooster Street is, like Kara said, we simply want to remove the existing shutters that were placed in the 1980s. They're not original. They're rotting from the inside. It's very problematic for the building with graffiti and rotting. There's a shutter that is stable here that we want to remove and replace it with a storefront to match the existing. And we also are applying for a signage. It's metal painted to be mounted on a mullion, as you can see in this photo montage. It matches the signage with its neighbors down the block. This board shows a historical picture from the 1970s, which the shutters didn't exist. And this is a picture from the 80s, which they installed the shutter. And this is a photo montage showing the storefront open in that location where the shutters are stable and with the shutters removed. And that's basically it. It's simple.
So the reason for removing the shutters is basically because the upkeep is difficult?
Not only that, it's also, as you can see in this picture, when you're walking south or even north, look at the shutters. It's hiding the beautiful granite and cast iron building. I mean, they're really ugly. They're rusting from the inside, and it's hiding our beautiful building.
These are not original shutters.
They're not original.
This is some, it's almost like not a shutter.
Yeah.
It's an architectural device brought on when in the 80s.
Yes.
All right, are there other questions for the applicant right now? Yes, Diana?
Just basically, the question is, which I think Fred was just referring, obviously, these shutters are recent additions, but were shutters original to the building? Or were shutters original to the building? Do we have any evidence?
They probably were, if they were there, they were probably in the back of the building?
Yeah.
They were in the front.
It's unusual, yeah, that's why I'm asking if it's some strange, Okay.
The C of A was very specific as to why it was found appropriate.
When it was done.
Right in the 80s, and Kara has a copy of it if you like to.
All right, are there any other questions for the applicant right now? Okay, why don't we take, yes, Adi, and then we'll take testimony.
They are attached or secured into the what? How are they attached to the building?
It's kind of secured into the soffit.
That's
It's
good.
kind of on like a sliding, they've been open for many years, so, and
There's not a pinto in the stone, there's a
yeah, there's
track.
like a track, yeah,
It's part of the
yeah, the whole system.
entire assembly.
So that would be removed?
Yes,
And what would you be patching, or?
yes.
But right now, the shutters, since they're never closed,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's shop windows, they're not gonna close the shop windows. So when they're open, they block the stone.
Yeah, the
The
stone
original
and the
stone.
cast iron. It's,
So maybe in the
Crazy.
80s, this was seen as an appropriate thing to do, but I mean, you could see it now as maybe not so appropriate. Anyway, I can see it as appropriate to remove it.
Right, I think that at that time, the question, the appropriateness had to do with the storefronts and the introduction or having this device or conceit, as you said, of these shutters was to somehow address the fact that otherwise they were very large, expansive glass on the facade. I think that maybe the unintended effect that we're being told now is that there's, by having these shutters, it actually obscures some historic elements that we would like to see. Okay, so I think, all right, before we go into comments, are there any other questions for the applicant right now? Okay, why don't we take testimony, and Barbara Zay?
Barbara Zay of the Historic Districts Council. While the current storefront lacks visual richness, HDC would prefer to see a proposal that takes this building in a better direction toward historic appropriateness. We did not have an issue with the shutters being removed. The aluminum frame and large quantity of glazing does not do the building justice. Without a clear example to follow, perhaps neighborhood precedents could be examined to find a more sensitive storefront design.
All right, Henny Smith-Miller?
Well, I find this an extremely rare situation for me,
Yeah, I would say.
because I was once here in 87, and made a presentation about these famous shutters. I'm sorry I don't have very large images, but they still exist on Green Street as actually a prototype and a reference for the project we did. The previous condition of this building, the ground floor, which was sold to my client, was bad 60s brick and windows that didn't go to the floor. I made an amazing discovery when I was studying it, that the neoclassical facade actually had an error in it. I don't know, maybe I can get closer to you. This issue of the passage of time, I think, is relevant. And I think the chair mentioned it, that the context under which we were charged with designing the facade to replace the 60s era one was a different time. However, what I liked was the fact that this is all 4-bay, 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 as you can see, all equal, and it goes small, large, small, small, large, whoops, small, large, small. And for some reason, in the 1880s, when the building was designed, there's a column in the wrong place here. So I reorganized the entrance to let the window glass slide to bring the thing back into what I consider to be a decent arrangement. What I find strange is that this application is trying to remove something that received a design award from this commission when it was presented here. And the argument is facetious in the fact that the owners have not maintained this actual piece of facade, and they're claiming they want to remove it because it's rusted. So does this set a precedent for when somebody makes a contribution or improves their property and it begins to rust, that they can abandon it? I don't know. That's not. So, of course, I'm an interested person about this because it's my work. And I'm also very proud of having come before the commission this situation better. This is a picture of the shutters when they were installed. They're made out of stainless steel. They were actually factory painted. And again, the fact that the building doesn't choose to maintain them should not be a reason to remove them. The other argument, which is actually more interesting, is if this was a convenience or a way of actually bringing the building into the 1980s condition and restoring it, and now the situation is different in Soho, which it is, well, that's a different argument. So I'd like you to remember that there have been successive histories with regard to this particular building, and that the histories have changed, and this particular piece of work that I offered was actually awarded a prize, one of the first prizes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Miller. Your time is up. All right. Are there any other speakers on this item? We received a resolution from Community Board 2. Community Board 2 recommends approval of this application. Okay. Do we have any more questions for the applicant? Yes, Adi?
Yeah, I've looked through this thing, and I still don't see in this little package that I have here, what you are proposing, your storefront. Where is it? Can I understand better? It's in the big,
I think it's in the bigger
It's
package.
I'm
the
looking
other
for it
package.
still. Okay,
Sorry.
okay, sorry. And so it's just the one panel?
Yes. So it's
Is that one pa- right.
it's the removal of all the shutters and just the replacement of this panel to a storefront to match the existing, the rest.
And the designation, when it was, the building wasn't designed, but when the shutters were not in place during designation.
Okay, this is my understanding. It's not clear that this building had shutters historically.
Clearly,
It did not, right?
It did not.
When this application came before under a certificate of appropriateness in 1980s, 87, they were looking at, and please correct me if I'm, they were changing the storefronts, is that right? And putting this glazing as a part of that. That application included the shutters, recalling from other buildings, I gathered from Mr. Smith-Miller right now that there were other buildings that had shutters, and that was included as a part of the proposal, and the commission found the package, the glazing and the shutters appropriate. So now what's before us is, really, the question for us is that if this element is removed, which is the shutters, they're not historic per se, but does that mean that the rest, which came as a part of the certificate appropriate the first time, is that appropriate? So that's the question for the commission. Are there any more questions for the applicant right now? Okay, all right. Yes, comments, questions, or ideas? Yeah, go ahead.
I'll just
Fred,
make
go
a few
ahead.
comments.
Yeah.
I think this is a very unusual case, first of all. But I think you framed the question very well for us now. I mean, the question is, this was an 80s infill, which was fully approved by a former set of commissioners. And now the question is, if you remove a part of it, but not all of it, you don't remove the glass, which I presume is probably had a bulkhead, so the bulkhead's gone. If you remove just the shutters, which are hiding because they're never closed, they're always open, and they hide parts of the stone base of the building, is that an appropriate thing to be doing? I don't recall that we've ever had anything quite like this that I'm aware of, so it requires us to kind of think deeply about all this. But I would say that I could find it appropriate. I think there's plenty of places where we have allowed glass, if not fully to the base, but maybe with a small balustrade, all over Soho. I mean, we accept that Soho is a different place than we thought it was in the 80s, and certainly than it was when it was constructed in the 19th century. So there's been a lot of adaptive reuse, particularly of the ground floor of Soho buildings to allow commercial use. So I'm sort of talking as I think, but I think I could find it appropriate because of those reasons.
Yes,
Which is to say nothing about the design from the 80s, or the commission or the set of commissioners that approved it in the 80s. I just think it's a new, it's 30 years later, and we have a different point of view. But anyway, that's my point of view now.
Okay. Yes, Diana?
Yeah, I was just going to say, yes, I feel that because we permit, there's a wide variation in storefront approvals that we've made over time, and commissions see those on a regular basis for the applicant coming forward to want to have a different appearance of a storefront, and that's just very, very common. So I don't find there's really a historic preservation motive in this case, which would be one of the things we would obviously look for. It's not clear that this, whether this was a historic feature, it's certainly it's being uncommon wouldn't be something we wouldn't necessarily want to preserve, but in this case we've also got the appropriateness issue of it actually removing the shutters at this point in time would reveal more of the historic facade, which is, I think, a positive in this case. So I think that between the issue of allowing better presentation of the facade and the fact that I'm sure we're going to see another storefront probably in a few years from somebody coming at this, and I don't think the storefront as without the shutters is inappropriate, and I think that the lack of the shutters is better from the perspective of the facade, so I could approve it. And there's no precedent involved in, us approving a different.
Right. I don't know that I agree. I mean, clearly, the building can sort of can take not having the shutters, but the preservation issue here has to do with the memory of Soho of the late 70s and the 80s, which is a Soho that was, by 87 it had changed a lot, but I mean, it had become what it was going to become, certainly not what it is at this moment, which is largely vacant and filled with, absentee owners and vacant, that is, in terms of residential. But, so I think that there's something about these shutters that reminds me and all of us of that Soho, when there were still artists there, when there was a kind of an interpretation of the place, when it was a little bit, it was not entirely monetized. It's not the Soho that it is today. So I actually think that there is a character issue that these shutters recall and speak to, and I'm a little bit hesitant to remove them.
Okay. I mean, I think I concur, or I'm more sort of leaning towards Fred and Diana on this one. I think that the area has changed, and I think the interventions that the Commission has allowed has changed also over time. And sometimes we can lament it, and sometimes maybe not, but I think in this case, the shutters, well, first of all, the shutters are always open, and they're I don't think they ever close, and it doesn't seem that we find ourselves on the street recalling some of that. It's not that you can't see it, but I would agree with some of the other commissioners that in its sort of folded position, it actually takes away from some of these, the actual historic element. I'm not troubled by the amount of glazing that's